Good morning to the Honorable Ministers of the Council, members of the media, online viewers, radio listeners via Simran Gov Radio 107.9 FM and respective radio stations island-wide. I'm Rolika Roach and welcome to the live Council of Ministers press briefing for today, Wednesday, January 29th, 2020. At this time, I invite the Minister of Public Health, Social Development and Labor, the Honorable Pamela Gordon-Carty, to address you.
Good morning, Honorable Prime Minister, ministers, and all the listeners of the different medias. Last week, I was not in the press conference, even though I know that most likely it had questions regarding the coronavirus already. But due to the death of my mother-in-law, I was not present. Today, as Minister of VSA, I'm here to give the following updates when it comes to the health sector. The coronavirus is still not a threat in the Caribbean so far as we speak. We are in constant contact with the different organizations in regards to development and awareness campaign on the island. We have been in discussions with different organizations like PAHO, WHO, which is the World Health Organization, in order for them to provide us with up-to-date information regarding how to deal with the virus. We are also in constant contact with SMMC, the director, which is in constant contact with us in updating us on the different procedures, training, and equipment that are being bought in order to be prepared. Might it reach that far that they have to take drastic measures. I want to ensure and assure basically the public of St. Martin so far that everybody have their hands on deck, and all the organizations and institutions that are involved in the coronavirus, we have constant contact with each other in order for us to stay prepared and be alert whenever a decision has to be taken. When it comes to preventative measures, you need to continue washing your hands with soap and water or alcohol-based hand sanitizer, coughing and sneezing in tissues to avoid germs from spreading. Last week, I was in, as Minister of VSA, we have the following update when it comes to the, can I say the one from TIAT too one time? I had conversation as the replacing Minister of TIAT. I had conversations with the harbor and with the port, and they were informing me about the different procedures that they have in place, and that they are training and updating the personnel on a regular basis. Also, they are in close touch with airlines on how it is they're going to minimize the impact of importing this virus on the island. According to information received, they are stating that basically on the ships, they have different pamphlets, they have different designated persons who will be providing information to the passengers on the cruise ship, and to continue using or applying basically hand sanitizer, proper hygienic procedures to avoid it from spreading. So on the cruise lines and also on the airplanes, that is being done. The last information that I received was that we are requesting also cooperation from the radio stations for when we have to basically give out information, not to use it as a source to create income, extra income, but if it's possible that we can get the cooperation when it comes to disseminating the information of the virus, that this can be done free of charge as it is for the public well-being. We have conversations with Telem, and Telem had already agreed to do this free of charge. The CPS, which is a department from Ministry of VSA, is constantly informing the public via the medias of the Daily Herald and also on the site from the St. Martin government site on what are the daily updated news, factual news about the coronavirus. So we advise everyone to just follow the government website in order for them to be on an informative basis and being informed on the latest update when it comes to the coronavirus. Fake news can always be verified with CPS and with the government itself. Of course, the website is stmartingov.org and the Facebook page is SXMGov, where you can get additional information. That was it for the two ministries. If there is any questions, I'll await the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Gordon Carty, for your opening remarks. At this time, I invite the Minister of Public Housing, Spatial Planning, Environment and Infrastructure, the Honorable Christopher Waver, to address you.
Thank you, Ms. Roach. Good morning to the Honorable Prime Minister, colleague ministers, members of the media, and a special good morning to the people of St. Martin. Just a brief update. Last week, I had the honor to attend a meeting that was organized by Sea Shepherd, which they brought different stakeholders into one room, and the topic was to protect the sea turtles and different means as to how we can protect the sea turtles. It was stakeholders from both sides, from the French side and the Dutch side. So there were persons from the policy department from the VROMI ministry. Also present were the gendarmerie from the French side and some other NGOs which are looking as to how we can reduce the unnecessary killing and the well-being of the turtles. So I had the honor of that, and I hope that continues as well, as to certain solutions, as to what we can do as to when it comes to pollution. Plastic is one of the main concerns as well. And also the speed limit that we need to restrict in the lagoon for the vessels, as a lot of the turtles are being killed by the vessels speeding well in the lagoon. I'm happy to announce that as of yesterday, a technical workshop was organized by the NRPB in collaboration with VROMI and the World Bank. It started yesterday and it should conclude by tomorrow, Thursday, the 30th of January. The main topic is the civil works and also the landfill and how to proceed from there. As you know, on Monday we were able to finally receive a bulldozer from the trust fund, which will be used on the landfill. But due to certain technicalities, the bulldozer is not allowed to be used for civil works. So those are some of the challenges we are facing right now when it comes to the usage of equipment and what is allowed. So therefore, these fruitful conversations which is taking place from yesterday and ending on Thursday, we're hoping to have a positive result as to the landfill has enhanced over the time as well. And the Ministry of Romi has worked diligently and reprofiled the landfill, and it is not what it used to be in the past. So we have come a long way as that is concerned. And I'm hoping that by next week, I'll have a positive update as to how these meetings ended and the way forward with that. I would also like to announce that the ministry is also looking into restarting the road works, the patching of the roads, and due to the heavy rainfall, we are noticing that a lot more potholes are popping up, and the ones that were smaller are now increasing in size. So that is also a priority for myself, that we commence this in timely fashion. I know there's conversations already in place with Windward Roads NV and the ministry as to the scheduling of these works. As soon these are finalized, I will also update you on this. Lastly, I was updated this morning that NVGBE is expecting one shipment of the street lights to come in as early as next week. This is just one of the shipments, so that way we can start to see some more street lights being fixed and lighting up these concerned areas. And as I was told by the Minister of Justice earlier this week as well, safety concern is a top priority, and the more districts we can light up, the better for the community as well. This concludes my updates, and I await any questions from the media. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Waver, for your opening remarks. At this time, I would like to re-invite the Minister of Public Health, Social Development, and Labor, the Honorable Pamela Gordon-Carty, to add to her opening statements.
Thank you, Ms. Roach. I forget to inform the public as well that during last week, we had meeting with two major hotels on the island when it comes to construction work. And we sat with management and the owners of the hotel, in which we was exchanging some information. In this note, basically the management have agreed to do their due diligence to ensure that skilled local workers are given preference to be considered and hired for various functions, especially in the construction field. Tighter preventative measures are being put in place when it comes to legislation. During my tenure as Minister of VSA, with regards to the screening process of work permit requests, to ensure that our local labor force is placed at the forefront and considered for any open functions before giving the position to foreign workers. In support of this effort, in support of this effort, we are urging all local unemployed in whichever sector for you to come and register at the labor office, as we are basically doing the necessary negotiations to ensure that locals that are unemployed, skilled, and professionals can get the chance to get the job that is basically open. That was my additional note that I had to inform.
Thank you, Minister Gordon-Carty. At this time, I invite the Minister of Justice, the Honorable Egbert Duran, to address you.
Thank you, Ms. Roach. Good morning to the Honorable Prime Minister, my colleague ministers, members of the media, and good morning to the people of St. Martin. My colleague Minister of Romy spoke about the street lights and how we emphasize the importance of safety. And I would also like to tap into one of the points of concern that has to do with this as well. During the week, I met with various stakeholders in regards to the high rise in car thefts on St. Martin, and I also got some statistics. In 2016, I'm going to talk about stolen parts, and then I'm going to talk about vehicles. We had a total of 97 cars that was tampered with for stolen parts in 2016, 17, 18, and 19. In regards to stolen cars, in 2016, 23, in 2017, 36, 2018, 35, and 2019, 50. This is solely based on one insurance company, and this is based on claims that they paid out. So not cars that were not reported, and also not third parties, and also not other insurance companies. We see the peak in 2019. I feel that this is a top priority because besides traumatizing our people, when you steal someone's car, it is a traumatizing experience. It is also traumatizing for our tourists. and tourism is our main pillar, and we have to secure the safety of our people and also people that are visiting our island, because without the tourists, we cannot function as a country. And also to add that this is only based on the Dutch side as well. One thing I would like to say is that I take this very serious. I will meet with the stakeholders again next week in determining a plan of approach. I was also informed that there was a plan of approach on the table a few years ago, and I'm willing to meet with the head of the president of the insurance committee in order to establish a way forward. This is a joint approach that also includes not only the police, but receiver's office, the insurance companies, and the inspection. What we also noted that it is too easy to re-register a stolen car. So once we tackle the registration form of it, we will be able to move forward, because if someone steals a car, they register it again and sell it and sell it. And then the question boils down to who is the real owner, the one that bought it, because they bought it legally as well. So that is also a loophole that we are facing as a Ministry of Justice in order to attack and deal with this very serious issue. For now, I would leave it at there, and I would look forward to any questions being posed by the media. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Durant, for your opening remarks. At this time, I invite the Prime Minister and Minister of General Affairs, the Honorable Silveira Jacobs, to address you.
Thank you, Ms. Roach. Good morning to my colleague ministers here in the Council of Ministers press briefing room, to the members of the media, staff present, and all those following this broadcast. This morning, I would like to inform you that the Minister of Finance and sitting Minister of Education, Culture, Youth, and Sport is currently on a work travel. He has first stopped in the Netherlands, where today he was able to meet with the Plenipotentiary Minister to discuss preparations for the upcoming Kingdom Council of Ministers meeting, which will be held in about 2 weeks in February. Also to inform that I will be preparing also to travel to the Netherlands to take part in that meeting, so in the week of the 10th of February. The Minister, Irian, would also like to inform the general public, so as his substitute, I would like to, pertaining to finance, that the budget is, I know there were questions last week specifically about the budget. It is currently being reviewed by the CFT. Their deadline for the Article 11 is February 5th. Then we will need a few days for tweaking and making any necessary changes for it to go back to the Council of Ministers on February 11th. And after it has been to the Council of Ministers, then it can go on to the Council of Advice with a request for urgency, seeing the circumstances. This will take 2 to 4 weeks, hopefully, and then it will be on its way to Parliament. So that gives you a bit of a timeline as to about 2 to 4 weeks after February 11th. So hopefully in the beginning of March, that it will be able to go to Parliament for debate. The minister, after finishing his meetings in the Netherlands today, will be moving onwards to Luxembourg, where he will be meeting with the EIB, the European Investment Bank, to discuss alternative and additional financing possibilities for our country. He will be joined at some point during these meetings by the NRPB. So we wish him, of course, much success in that regard. From the Ministry of Education, Culture, Youth, and Sport, I do not have any updates at the moment, but if there are any questions, I will forward these to the ministry for answering, whether through the week or in press statements. From the Ministry of General Affairs, the Postal Services, St. Martin, had a quite important meeting with me during the past week. I met with PSS head, Ms. Marinka Gums, and Ms. Wilson to address current issues being faced by Postal Services St. Martin. There is actually, after our discussions and based on information that I'd received from Central Bank and other banking officials during my meetings the week before, it is clear that this problem that we have with Aruba and Curacao in terms of persons in St. Martin no longer being able to send funds to their family members there comes from the fact that, yes, partially from the fact that Curacao and Aruba were looking at St. Martin's public statement as a so-called threat because we do not have, or the post services does not have a compliance officer. No other banking services on St. Martin have had any issues because each bank on St. Martin, according to central bank regulations, has a compliance officer. So the post office was informed that once they have that person hired in, that they would be able to then continue with their international money transfer services. So they are expecting to mitigate that situation as soon as possible. I also had a courtesy meeting with the sitting management of the Central Bank of Curacao and St. Martin, who visited the St. Martin during last week. I sat with them on Wednesday, January 22nd, and they gave an update on some of the current challenges being faced, which I must say, after sitting with our Minister of Finance, that had already been brought up to speed on these. However, the management was here. More information, of course, will be forthcoming, but the management of the bank, together with the supervisory board, is working to mitigate the situation at the Hero Bank. Also, during last week, as Minister of General Affairs, I was representing or presenting the draft pension reform legislation in Parliament. And in determining the way forward, I will be having further discussions with the Committee of Civil Servants Union, CCSU, formerly CHEOA, next week. They had indeed requested meetings. However, those meetings were not requested pertaining to the pension reform. But of course, during next week's meeting, this discussion will also take part, or this will also form part of the agenda. As stated before, it is my goal to achieve the best possible outcome for the civil servants, understanding that with the current status of our pension legislation, that we would run into serious problems to be able to pay out in the next 10 to 15 years. It is very difficult at one moment to turn back once once the unions who were part of the discussion from the beginning have committed themselves to it and later now see a problem. So I am just getting the information now that some of the reasons why they did not, quote unquote, notice changes were made that were different to what they had originally agreed upon. As the last in the long line of general affairs ministers to be dealing with this piece of legislation, and also having served in Parliament and having questioned why certain consultations had not been done, which was since last May. I had expected that that had been done. The organization did assure me that that had been done, but it still appears that the union is dissatisfied with the outcome of those meetings. What is clear, or what had been made clear to me, which maybe was missed during my opening statements in Parliament, is that certain agreements had been made since 2016 about the way forward. The CHEOA changed to the CCSU, and these unions together, who represent workers on St. Martin, agreed on what the criteria would be to be members of the CCSU. So membership had to be that you represented at least a minimum of 10% of the organization of civil servants, whether it's police or whether it's other civil servants. And it is clear that, and another requisite was that you had to be registered on island. NRPB and ABVO were both Curacao-based in unions. The ABVO, in the meantime, has registered on St. Martin and does have now a local branch. However, the NRPB has not. So it is still not a legitimate union to be dealing with or being a member of the CCSU. So for me, due diligence has to be done also by the unions. And if you agree to and set the criteria, you are part of the group that set the criteria to protect St. Martin workers, and that you require that the union would have at least a 10% representation, then it is clear now that the unions that are stating that they're not having a say within what CCSU has agreed to, are actually not in compliance. And while they were allowed to go along in the discussions back then, it was clear that certain changes would have to be made, and they would have to do their due diligence. So I'd like to appeal to the unions in question to live up to those agreements, and to the civil servants themselves. If you find yourself underrepresented, so if you belong to a union with less than 10% representation, then that is for you, the civil servant, to choose which union should represent you, because the one that would have a say within the CCSU would be the one with more than 10% representation in that union. So then, for us as civil servants, and I am also one, we must decide then who represents us. And for me, it is important that the union maintains lives up to their responsibility to the workers. So you cannot agree to something on paper and later retract that agreement, so it cannot just go like that. I'm looking forward to open and transparent discussions with the unions and their representatives in the CCSU, and even individually if necessary, because of course to have a discussion with me, you don't need to have a minimum of 10% representation. I am willing to listen to all concerned, but it really concerns me that it has taken so long for hoor and wederhoor to take place in a good and transparent manner. From the organization's point of view, which is the government of St. Martin and the technical professionals dealing with the legislation, they feel like they have answered the same questions in at least 5 different meetings in Parliament. So it gets a bit frustrating for them in terms of this question was asked before. Another thing I noticed during that meeting was that several questions came that were not related to the legislation being handled. So some were on the AOV legislation, which is somewhere in the process, and I have not even had an opportunity to peruse that yet. So as such, we'll be preparing the answers to go back to Parliament, of course, and meeting with the union next week. And when that meeting is over, hopefully we will have agreed on the way forward. If amendments need to be made and can still be done at this stage, without delaying it over much, then that will be done. If the amendments can then be made from Parliament side, which can go much faster, then we will see if that will be done. But most definitely, this General Affairs Minister is only focused on finding a solution in the best interest of ensuring our financial stability within our budget, as well as taking care of our members of the civil service who are key to executing government's work. 2 key changes that this legislation addresses is raising the age from 62 maximum to 65. And the second point, which, there are as many people for as against that, since some of us have financial management issues and need to work a little longer to pay down on our mortgages, etc. The second point being moving from an end wage, taking 70% of that for your pension calculation, as to an average wage. I believe there's a great misunderstanding concerning that. For myself, who has been in government service since '92, they're not going to be looking at my average from '92 till 2020. What they will be doing is looking at where you are now, because when we went into the pension fund, it was the end wage. So they cannot take that away from you. It would only be persons who are entering the work now in 2020, if it is passed, that would be affected, that their average would be from beginning to end. For those of us already in civil service, it will start by where you are now. So that will be then from now until you reach your end, then the average will be calculated, and then 70% of that. So you will lose somewhat, but it will not be as big a loss as for the ones just coming in. So yes, we do have a better opportunity now than those coming in at this time, and the addressing big questions came to addressing the APS's investment, the management of their investments. And it's clear that they have lost money on the market over the past years, which, of course, if that continues, it may be actually less than 10 years that we can afford it with the current system. So we need to address things on multiple levels. Certain questions responded or questioned my authority as Minister of General Affairs to request certain things from APS, that authority actually belongs to the Minister of Finance. Toevallig this week, that's who I am. But under normal circumstances, it is the Minister of Finance who can then instruct APS on matters pertaining to its investment and other things. So as a Council of Ministers, together we will take the decisions on how we will move forward, and the general public will be informed as per usual. For any further questions, I am available as normal. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister Jacobs, for your opening remarks. If you've just joined us, you are watching the live Council of Ministers press briefing. We now move to the question and answer session. Nikisha Boseman of the Daily Herald, you have the floor.
Good morning to the ministers and good morning to all St. Martin tuned in. My first question is to Minister Jacobs on behalf of Minister Udian, who's not here today. Can you provide some basic information on the content of the draft budget? What is the total amount of the budget, and what are the basic elements of the budget?
Nikisha, good morning and thank you. Unfortunately, I do not have at hand the direct numbers for the budget, but I can definitely forward those to you in writing to be published. So the question was the totals, and what was the other part of the question?
And what are the basic elements of the budget?
Basic elements. What I can say about the basic elements is that they remain the same. What I do know is that cuts had to be made based on CFT recommendation, and that is what the current minister, together with the ministries that we tried to do. I can say that was a very difficult endeavor. We had been requested to do a cut of across the board, 10, 15? I'm not going to say because it might be wrong, but there was a general cut that was required, and most ministries were not able to find that space. And then once you do not do that, the Ministry of Finance then makes a decision, because they are the ones with the final responsibility. So you are given a set amount of time to cut where you feel your ministry can miss the funds, and if you do not reach the quota that has been established, then the ministry then within the finance department then makes that decision for us. So many of us in getting back the budget will see, oh my goodness, you were cut in places that you may not have liked, and then internally you would then have to make the transfers during the year, amendments of the budget in terms of transferring from one post to the other to be able to carry out your obligations. What I can say though is that the 2019 budget had certain things, certain elements in it that as member of parliament, I myself recommended changes to, and had started a discussion with in an amendment that I actually sent on before leaving parliament. The Ministry of Finance did take those changes into consideration. So whereas over 2.5 million had been established in the Ministry of Finance for consultants, that had been moved, or some of those funds were transferred to the Education, Culture, Youth and Sports portfolio, VSA and Justice, to give extra funding towards youth projects and sports where education is concerned. In Justice, to the Miss Lally Center, an extra fund was established, extra amount of funding from there. So it's an internal transfer. So it didn't change the bottom line of what the government was doing, and there were no cuts made in that. So where that is concerned, I'm very, very pleased, because it shows then government's commitment to put our money where our mouth is in terms of supporting youth-oriented projects. These will have a positive effect for justice, because then you have less students, less young people, because we're seeing the growing number of persons getting in problems, ending up in our criminal justice system, are between the ages of 16 to 24. That is considered youth, and so therefore we believe as a government we need to put our money there, and that was not cut. So those changes that I proposed back in 2019 are reflected in the 2020 budget. That I can say, and all the other information that is more specific, I will get from the Finance Ministry and forward to you via DCOM.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Lyndon Brown of BCN TV, you have the floor.
Good morning to the people of St. Martin and to the ministers that are present here today. Question to the Minister of Justice. From the prosecutor office, 13-year-old was the youngest person that have committed crime. Recently, a local lawyer make an analysis, and his emphasis was most of the people inmates at the prison a black male. Minister, how can you reduce? Do you have any plan to reduce the number? I was alarmed when the local lawyer mentioned. I challenged him on the basis, but I don't know. But that's according to what he said, because oftentimes he usually be at the court of first instance to defend these persons. So, do you have any plan to reduce that amount of our black youth in the prison?
Good morning, Mr. Brown. Thank you for your question. I would like to reiterate what the Prime Minister just stated in terms of investing more in our youth to prevent. So prevention is always better than cure. So we take preventative measures. The Prime Minister elucidated how we plan to invest more in the budget into our youth programs. She also mentioned Miss Lally Center. And we try to, before you reach to Miss Lally Center via education, you try to avoid that. But when they are there, you try to rehabilitate them in order for them not to continue in a life of crime, if you want to call it that. And so that's the answer, basically, invest more in our youth. So that are the steps that we have taken as a government thus far in order to slow the process or even stop the process when it comes to our youth getting involved in crime and eventually graduating to higher levels of crime. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Duran. We now move to the second round of questions. Nikisha, you have the floor.
My second question is for Minister Duran. Earlier you mentioned some statistics in regards to car robberies and parts and so forth. Can you give the name of the insurance company that provided this information, and also what are some of the concrete plans that will be taken by the ministry for this approach?
Thank you for your question, Ms. Boseman. I'd rather not mention the name of the insurance company at this point, but that's why I emphasized that it was one company, so that you know that the numbers are much greater. In regards to the plans, I mentioned the requirements for re-registering of vehicles. Once we deal with the requirements via inspection, via the receivers, via our police as well, then they will be able to make it more difficult for people to register stolen vehicles. That will be a way to mitigate the issue somewhat. And moving forward, as I mentioned, I was also informed yesterday that I think in 2016, there was already an entire plan of approach and everything, but it never was rolled out. So I still have to meet with the representative of the insurance companies, and he will elucidate more, and I have a meeting scheduled with him, I think on Tuesday next week. So then I will be able to elaborate further in terms of concrete plans moving forward. But for now, once you tackle the re-registering, that will deal with a lot of the issues, because right now it's very easy. And bill of sales are being forged, insurance documents are being forged, and that is the main issue that is making it so easy for people to steal cars and register them and sell them again.
Thank you, Minister Duran. Lyndon, you have the floor.
Question to Minister Gordon. The high point today, in St. Martin and the world is the coronavirus. Minister, it is of great concern to the people of St. Martin especially. Border control, we have border control. Where do they come in this matter? Of course, we have the airport, the harbor, the lagoon. Where do they come in this matter?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Brown. Border control is more under the Ministry of Justice, but to answer your question, when it comes to the port and the airport, when it comes to entry of the passengers, I can I can state that basically the immigration officers right about now are being informed on what measures they need to take in order if there is, like, for instance, the planes that are coming in from Holland, which have connection with France, when they are coming in to do specific type of checks within their passports, and also asking questions directly to the customers or to the passengers to see what were the different ports and different countries that they visited before coming in into St. Martin. The same type of process is being done also on the cruise ships. So basically answering that from the perspective of TIAT and Ministry of ESA, that would be the question. But when it comes to border control, that would be more Ministry of Justice.
Thank you, Minister Gordon Carty, for your question. For your answer. We now move on to the third round of questions. Nikisha, you have the floor.
My third question is for Minister Gordon Carty. Can you provide an update on the reconstruction of the hotel that will replace the Great Bay Beach Hotel?
We haven't had the opportunity as yet to sit down with Great Bay. The two hotels that were mentioned, one of them was not Great Bay. But when I have that answer, I will get back to you with that.
Thank you, Minister Gordon Carty. Lyndon, you have the final question.
Final question to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance is not here today. And last week, the Prime Minister mentioned that St. Martin would not help in the crisis of the Eurobank in Curacao. There was some conversation between the Central Bank and the Eurobank and St. Martin. Have anything changed so far? What was the, let me say, continuing discussion on that matter?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Brown. I did mention a few lines pertaining to the central bank management that visited me, Mr. Khardim and Mrs. Matros, along with technical assistance. They also visited the Minister of Finance. They had met with the Minister of Finance at the central bank, and they visited me at my office. The discussions were mainly of an update nature in terms of where they were, what steps were being taken by the central bank in terms of mitigating the issues that they have with the Hero Bank. What was made clear is that the government of Curacao had put together a committee to do some things, and that was being questioned because no decision can be taken at the Central Bank of Curacao and St. Martin without St. Martin's input. So St. Martin is not represented within that committee, and so therefore that information was brought forward. It was shared with us here as government of St. Martin, and if that committee makes a recommendation, the recommendation does not take St. Martin into consideration. So therefore, the central bank cannot accept those recommendations just because the Curacao government proposed them. So we are still at the point where we are having discussions in the best way to move forward for the Hero Bank, whereby St. Martin, as well as Curacao, has input in the decision-making process. The discussion also was centered around the replacement of Mr. Tra, who was a chairman, and St. Martin also has an opportunity there. He was a president of the bank. So in the meantime, there was a vote, and now the interim president is Mr. Khardim. St. Martin has the opportunity to name the next president, and so we will take our opportunity to do that. We do have time for that still. So we're moving forward. St. Martin is represented in it. The Minister of Finance, of course, can next week give you further elucidation as to, he's in direct discussion with the Minister of Finance of Curacao, and together with the Central Bank, they have those discussions. I am merely updated, and I do not have the latest update as of today, but when we had our discussions last week, there was still much decision making to be taken as to how they would alleviate the problem with the Hero Bank. When we mentioned that St. Martin would not be taking part in what was recommended that the Curacao government do in terms of increasing certain licensing fees, and I've heard a lot of discussions, twittering, as you may say, in the social media about whether when St. Martin is in trouble, Curacao lends a hand, etc., etc. But St. Martin is still in trouble financially, and we are not expecting Curacao to raise its taxes that St. Martin tax situation or lack of liquidity is mitigated. St. Martin is already in a liquid negative position. We are doing well considering where we were 2 years ago. Much of the Caribbean cannot boast of that. Even with a promise of liquidity support and not receiving it. We made it through 2019. We're still fighting for that liquidity support because we need it. We are not in the best financial position at this moment, and we are not expecting Curacao to raise their taxes to assist us. This was a situation whereby decisions were made with Curacao banks, and while the Central Bank of Curacao and St. Martin is representative of both countries, decisions that were taken at a time really put us at great risk. And they were taken to save Curacao banks for a much longer period than was actually financially feasible. So, you know, that created quite some issues and challenges within the bank, and I believe that the bank should be given the opportunity to resolve those problems. I do not think that on a weekly basis you will get the kind of update you would like to have. But as soon as there is a definite decision moving forward, the general public and media will be informed.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Honorable Ministers of the Council, members of the media, radio listeners, and online viewers, this brings us to the end of the live Council of Ministers press briefing for today, Wednesday, January 29th, 2020. For rebroadcast, tune in at 7 p.m. on St. Martin Cable TV and via St. Martin Gov Radio 107.9 FM. For video on demand, log on to the official government's website at stmartingov.org. On behalf of the Department of Communication, I'm Rebecca Roach, and wishing you a pleasant day further.